Hello, good morning, and welcome to Replacing Infinity with Mechanics, a proposal for the unification of space-time topology using the 4D Prince Rupert's drop. Author of this axis is from the G-Rant. All right, welcome everyone. Today we're not going to invent new mathematics. The math of general relativity and quantum mechanics is brilliant, but I'm going to show you a novel and mechanical slot in math that everyone has missed, possibly. I'd like people to try to prove this wrong. We're going to replace the abstract concept of infinity with the physical reality of material science. We are looking at the 4D space-time Prince Rupert's drop. So the idea being that space-time itself forms a Prince Rupert's drop. General relativity successfully models the macro universe to a 0.9 probability, but breaks at the core of the black hole. Current mathematics collapse into an infinity, a point of infinite crush. This proposal argues singularities do not exist. Infinities are mathematical errors, not physical space. So, general relativity models the macro and micro. At the core of a black hole, math hits a wall. It spits out a singularity, a point of infinite density. But as physicists, we know the universe doesn't do infinities. Infinity is a math error. It is a sign of mechanical breakdown. This proposal argues that singularities do not exist, that we are actually looking at a mechanical phase transition that we simply haven't mapped yet. So, as the black hole forms, think of the event horizon as the outer shell of the Prince Rupert's drop. And everything inside is twisted to its center, the vulnerable core, but that center is inside the space of the hole itself. Prince Rupert drop demonstrates how opposing internal forces create supermaterial structure. Flash, cool, and vitrifies. The hypercompressed indestructible shell governs infinite compressive stress withstanding bullets. The core, cool slowly pulling away from the center, creates a negative pressure, highly fragile, governed by extreme tensile strength. Possible connection to string theory here. To understand this, we have to look at the stream material science. So it says, let's look at Prince Rupert's drop. When you drop molten glass into freezing water, you induce thermal shock. The outside flash cools into an indestructible, highly compressed shell, but the inside cools slowly, pulling away from the center, leaving a highly fragile core under immense tensile strength. It's perfect tensegrity, I think that's how you pronounce that, structure, maximum inward crush, perfectly balanced by maximum outward pull. And I do apologize, there are some words I am reading off the script I've made that I have only ever read to myself in my head. I'm not quite sure how these words are meant to be said out loud, but it's be cool. So, the paradox, the infinite inward push is perfectly balanced by the infinite outward push. It's not so much infinity, but as these crazy variables happen, it's going to balance itself out. We have the fragile internal tail. A slightly damaged or nipped, the internal tension snaps, the indestructible head violently shatters into dust. And if we wrap this around 4D space, we can put it back at the center. Mapping glass to gravity, the event horizon. Now, map that thermal shock directly onto gravitational collapse. As a dying star collapses, extreme torsion fields act as gravitational brake. Gravity pulls in, torsion pushes out. At the Planck limit, space-time undergoes a phase transition. It vitrifies. The event horizon is not a mathematical point of no return. It is a physical, high-compression 4D shell. It locks into place. So we have the rapid cooling, the thermal quenching. We have torsion breaking at the Planck densities. Indestructible glass head, a 4D space-time shell, a event horizon. The negative pressure from our core, the dense matter vacuum of the core. We have the fragile glass tail, suspended 3D matter, and nipping the tail, we have maximum entropy and decoherence. Because the 4D shell locks into place, the 3D matter inside is spared from the infinite crush. Instead, it is highly stretched. The interior becomes a localized de Sitter vacuum. The matter becomes the fragile tail of our space-time drop, suspended in extreme tensile strength. Dying star collapses inward, accelerating rotation. Density reaches Planck levels. Intrinsic particle spin generates extreme torsion, accident of gravitational break. Gravity collides with torsion. Space-time instantly squinches. The event horizon is not a mathematical boundary, but a vitrified 4D structural shell. So we have the space-time vitrification. At the event horizon, the clash of gravity and torsion forces a phase transition. Space-time locks into a high compression, impenetrable 4D shell. This is the head of the space-time drop. The rigid exterior spares the interior matter from infinite crush, creating a de Sitter vacuum. So, the core mechanism, because the 4D shell locks into place structure, cannot crush further inward. We have our negative pressure state. Interior stretched outward by the shell, creating a state of negative pressure. We have 3D matter in the tail. And the suspended matter, the 3D matter, becomes a highly fragile tail preserved entirely within the lethal compression shell. Here we go, the equilibrium equation. This brings us to the math. The structure only survives if it maintains absolute net zero tensegrity. Look at the equation. The integral of the compressive stress of the 4D shell, T sub c, pulls the tensile stress of the 3D core, P sub t. Must equal 0. If it isn't balanced, the system will collapse. Only remains stable as long as it is balanced. Just like anything in math, there has to be a balance. And when you cross something over the equal sign of an equation, it inverts it. It flips. The F orbital angular node. So how does the fragile 3D core survive without touching the lethal compressive cell? Through fluid dynamics, of course. The extreme spinning torsion field knots space-time into complex geometric lobes, specifically an F orbital structure. The fragile 3D matter the fragile 3D matter rests precisely in the angular node. It sits in a zero probability dead zone, completely isolated from the chaotic compression of the boundary. The knotting of spacetime at these energies does not behave as a simple sphere. The spinning torsion field knots it into complex geometric lobes. The angular node, a localized dead zone of zero probability, sits precisely at the center. The fragile 3D tail rests suspended in this node, completely isolated from the chaotic compression of the shell. Diagnostic matrix. Transition from the 0.99999 infinitely repeating, and to 4D unity. But let's look at the macro architecture of this balance. If you divide this unified system into thirds, the head, the tail, and the residual, you get 0.333 of each. Combined, they equal 0.999. But the universe demands absolute unity. X must equal 1. I want to give a shout out to Terrence Howard here, who correctly, by intuition, that the patterns we see in 3D are often just shadows of higher dimensional structures. He knew the problem was embedded in the square root of 2 paradox, that irrational 0.414 remainder. In our model, that remainder isn't a rounding error, it's physical tension. To get from 0.999 infinitely repeating to a perfect 1.0, the universe applies a 90-degree 4D torsion twist. That tiny higher dimensional movement adds the final mathematical fraction, locking the gear. When it twists, the excessive tension snaps off as physical shard debris. We call the debris dark matter. This also completely contextualizes Hawking radiation. As the internal 3D core ages, entropy increases. Reality inside begins to stretch and microscopical fractures, a type of fracturing. Can't read that word. English is not good enough. That internal friction generates immense thermal energy. Hawking radiation is not the black hole quietly deleting information. It is the thermal bleed off from that internal friction, balancing the thermodynamics equation with the larger parent system. Eventually, when entropy peaks, the tensegrity fails and the drop catastrophically shatters, ejecting all structurally frozen information back into the cosmos. There's a prediction we're going to see the end of the black hole. Might be proven true or false. Odd coincidences and conclusion. Well, before we get there, as black hole slowly evaporates via Hawking radiation, the information that originally fell into it appears to be lost forever, exiting the observable universe. The quantum mechanics conflicts. This violates core tenets of quantum mechanics, which state information cannot be destroyed or lost, leading to a fundamental paradox. The event horizon acts as a physical vitrification 4D mirror. Data is not deleted, it is structurally encoded into the high compression lattice of the shell. AC blue compression. Structural compression freezes information into a physical shell, no data void. So when DC talked about the wall at the end of the universe, they were onto something. Everyone, all sorts of people in science fiction have been slowly slotting information together. It's a wall, but not what you think. How to resolve the paradox. The black hole does not quietly evaporate. When the tail snaps, catastrophically shatters, releasing stored torsion, returning all data to the universe. Our equation. Placed in mathematical infinity with physical phase transitions. This is an open source framework. The mathematical community is invited to run the stress test on the singularity equation, which was replaced in mathematical infinity with a mechanical phase transition, balance the ledger of general relativity. All right, so here are now some odd coincidences. Coincidence number one. You know what? We're going to pull up a document to get this up here. So, the Hubble tension crisis in modern cosmology just happens to perfectly match the mechanical difference between 3D spring tension and 4D shell stiffness. Coincidence number two. The dark flow of galaxies cluster just happens to perfectly map to the hydrodynamic drift of a 4D soliton floating inside of a 5D parent fluid. Coincidence three. I think I messed up my numbers. Dyslexia kicking in. Dark matter just happens to pull exactly where galactic rotation creates the maximum torsion shear necessary to snap off our 0.414 geometric tension shard off the square root of 2. Coincidence number four. The biological quarter power scaling of living cells just happened to use the exact same compressive tensile tensegrity balance that this model applies to black holes. So let's see if I could add a text box in. And that's it. So yeah, I would love for someone to try to prove me wrong here. Have fun, everyone. Good luck. This would be cool if it works.